Good afternoon, Luang Por.
Good afternoon, Ajahn Sumedho.
So today is Thursday, the 31st of December 2020, and thank you for making yourself available for another session of Dhamma.
Yes, well, this is New Year's Eve, and I wish everybody, may they have a happy New Year, and may you develop in wisdom and happiness, mindfulness in the year 2021.
Sadhu. So this morning someone was asking a question. What is it in your practice that led you to practice with so much commitment and really entirely giving yourself to the practice? Is there a way to answer that question?
Well, I align it with let's say it's a kind of intuitive feeling. Like, I've been educated through the intellect, through acquiring information, going to school, studying subjects, and getting degrees in universities and things like this. So I acquired a lot of knowledge. But ever since childhood, I've often, felt, more intuitively aware of life. And the rational side of me was developed into a very critical mind, because you can see what's wrong, or you can idealize of what perfection would be, what ideals, you create in your mind with thinking, with words. But several experiences I've had before I ever encountered Buddhism were kind of what we might call mystical experiences, feelings of intuitive awareness with nature. So I like to refer to when I was 19 years old in the Navy. I went to an Episcopalian monastery in Santa Barbara for a weekend and had a mystical experience of no self. It was on a Sunday afternoon. I was wandering in the hills outside of Santa Barbara, and suddenly the whole sense of a separate self, because at 19 you're very self-conscious, and you're not really mature, but you're in a situation you're not happy in. You don't like being in the military, and you don't know what to do with your life. So I decided to spend a weekend at this Anglican monastery, and just to get away from the busyness of life in the naval base in San Diego. And I had this mystical experience. I didn't understand it at the time, but it wasn't intellectual at all, and it wasn't even associated with Christianity. It was just a whole sense of no self, not being anybody, just being completely peaceful and happy without thoughts. And then the thought arose, I wish I could be like this all the time. So I remember that as being quite profound, because as soon as I went back to the naval base, the whole, previous thoughts and habits, conditioning came forth, and I was back to where I was before. But it left an impression, like a memory. And I call this in Buddhist terms, in Pali terms, we call it paramitas, accumulated virtues, but I didn't have any understanding of that till years later. But in Christianity, they have this sense of grace, somehow that when we're open, then grace, or the grace of love or God or universal benevolence can affect us. So 2 years later I encountered Zen Buddhism, and that when I was in Japan in the Navy, and suddenly that whole sense of not-self, of anatta, really impressed me in a way that, even though I couldn't understand it intellectually, because you can't really conceive no self with your thoughts, with your intellect. You end up with there's self or no self, meaning a kind of annihilation. But anatta isn't, or the Pali word for no self is anatta, which isn't about annihilation of anything. So I pursued, that was when I was 21, I pursued that, through Zen and through Theravada Buddhism. So it's like an intuitive awakening. Because as I saw myself at 19, as I remember, I was very critical, of myself, of the military life, of the people I worked with in the naval base and so forth, just in the sense of meaninglessness and confusion and resentments. So I developed the intellect, which was turning on against me, as I turned it toward myself, as I could see so many imperfections. As an ideal person, an ideal man, I couldn't see myself as ideal in any way. I just was aware of how angry I was and how frightened I was and self-conscious I was, and whose fault is it? Because we tend to want to blame somebody, like our parents or our family or our political system, our society, or because I was Christian at the time, I started blaming God. Why did he create me like this? Why didn't he make me perfect? And where you're told God loves you totally, and then he creates these endless problems. It seems like, he creates a condition, a human being who has nothing but problems and fears and self-consciousness and anxiety and worry. So when I encountered Buddhism, 2 years after that, I was 21, I intuitively understood it. If you'd have asked me at the time what Zen Buddhism was about, I couldn't have explained it to you. It wasn't like a rational choice, but it was an intuitive insight. It was an insight, a sense of, I understand this in a way that I can't explain it through words, through the intellect. So this led me onward to finally ordaining as a monk when I was 31, 10 years past.
And it's that same inner pull, that intuitive sense that then when you ordained as a monk led you to really be fascinated with the teachings and really interested in discovering how they applied to yourself?
Yeah, well, that's where I found in the Theravada tradition, the suttas in the Pali Canon, the scriptures in Theravada. I found these, very powerfully helpful, because how do you become intuitive? How do you develop intuition? When you think about it, and you kind of know what it is, but your whole sense of the world around you, your position in it, is based on concepts, on ideas. And so, and intuition is not a concept. The word itself is, but it's the reality and is awareness, mindfulness. And so, just like the Buddha's statement when he was enlightened, the door to the deathless is open. Aparuta desanga matasatara. That really inspired me, because I didn't know what the deathless was, but I felt it had to be aligned with intuition, with mindfulness. It couldn't be just some abstract metaphysical theory. And the reflections on Dhamma in the Theravada tradition are all about here and now. Reality is here and now, timeless. And so you start investigating, what do you mean by Dhamma? What does the word Dhamma mean to me? Because it's not part of my cultural background, religious conditioning. And at first it's associated with fate, with say one's Dharma, or as it generally gets corrupted through English translations or way Western people interpret Buddhist teachings. But in the Theravada school, it means reality itself. And when we talk about apparent here and now, then what is, if Dhamma is apparent here and now, what is apparent here and now? So you ask yourself these questions. If it's not Dhamma, some kind of abstract metaphysical theory that you have to believe in, there's no sense of believing in Dhamma, or that you have to believe it, or teachings about Dhamma, but it's apparent here and now. And what is apparent here and now is consciousness. Well, it's wherever you are, whatever the situation you're in, no matter how you're feeling. And then mindfulness, and they use these different words in Vipassana teachings: consciousness, mindfulness, awareness. And, then people argue about which is the exact meaning, and according to the Pali scriptures, and get intellectually involved in trying to find the perfect English equivalent for Dhamma. And then that's you're back in the intellectual world again, arguing about definitions rather than trusting intuitive awareness. So I kept having these messages, these kind of insights of trust, awareness. Trust it, because it's here and now. It's not something you develop and you've got to get through discipline or exercise, but something that is here and now. And then you investigate. And so I can say, well, Ajahn Asoka is apparent here now, but that changes. He's not always here and now for me, for the reality of being. But wherever I am, whether it's in Bangkok or in Wat Pah Pong or in Amaravati or any place on an airplane, this consciousness is here and now. So you begin through investigating that, you find you can easily misinterpret Pali teachings because of the cultural conditioning. And so, you end up, the Buddha made it very clear in his Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, his first sermon after enlightenment, that it's neither in sensory indulgence or in annihilation. But it's apparent here and now. Reality is now. And so then we also have this reflection on timelessness. Akalika Dhamma is timeless. Well, all our conditioning, our social conditioning, our education, our cultural conditioning, is all about time. It's about the past. Even Buddhism, we talk about the Buddha 2,560 years ago. So Buddha easily gets aligned with a person that is remembered from the past 2,560 years ago, and that's memory. But what is apparent here and now is that they're conscious. Everybody knows they're conscious, and consciousness, awareness, mindfulness, they really mean the same thing. When you're talking about the unborn, uncreated, the formless, the immeasurable, you have to give up trying to define it, because there's nothing to define, because it's intuitive, it's awareness, it's consciousness here and now. So whatever words you want to call it, they can be skillful means only, but they can't define it. It's only through trusting awareness that you learn to really surrender to it, to give yourself totally to awareness here and now.
One question that comes up regularly, and I've asked you this in previous videos, but people still ask, how do you learn to trust awareness?
Well, if I say, how do you trust awareness? There's no way to tell you how to do it. It's just doing it. It's like this. So like Luang Cha used, they have in Zen words, they use the suchness, or words that really have no meaning other than the present moment, the reality of here and now. And then you investigate, like for instance, your eyes are very dependent on other conditions. So consciousness through seeing depends on light. You have to have light to see. In a dark room, you can't see, and also, like at my age, my vision is deteriorating very quickly. So it's if I depended on seeing here and now and what I see, well, then that even with the best vision, it's always changing. So sensory consciousness through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching it's all very impermanent. It depends on other conditions and changes accordingly. And so you can't take refuge in it. Just like concepts or beliefs, you're asked to believe in God or believe in some ultimate reality. So you form a kind of ideal of that. You're trying to manifest it in some way, as define it, where apparent here now is not definable. It's recognizable. It's knowing here and now is like this, and it's non-judgmental. It's not about pleasant or painful, right or wrong. So in these words, it's like this. And in Pali they use datta-da, the word datta-da meaning it's like this, it's the way it is. And Luang Cha was very good in the early years of my monastic life in Thailand. was being the embodiment of the way it is. Because the way he acted, the way he was pointing is, I was idolizing monasticism, and I formed my ideal monastery through meeting Luang Por Chah. I had ideals of how Thai monasticism should be, and about a good monk, what a good monk should be like, about an ideal bhikkhu, and what an arahant is, an enlightened monk, enlightened human being. You form ideals about arahants, about enlightenment, about teachers, about traditions, and then you find things aren't always, that's not always the way things are. Teachers are not ideals. And there's no ideal monastery. Wherever you go, there's something that you don't approve of or don't understand. And so the way it is, Luang Por would always come back when I started complaining or about myself, about the monastery, about our tradition. He said, it's the way it is, which can sound like a put down, but it's a pointer. At this moment, just this moment can only be like this. Sitting here with Ajahn Sumedho can only be this way. And I can't tell you, describe it. If I start describing it, then I'm missing the point, because it's apparent here and now and timeless. And so you give up trying to define, describe, and measure, and create images of ideals of perfection, but realizing perfection is reality itself. So you begin to see, when you see yourself as a physical body, when you just look at yourself as a man or woman, and whatever age, whatever race or nationality, you're going to find fault with it. Because these human bodies are, they get old, they get sick, they die, they change. Some are beautiful, some are ugly, and they can't always stay. Even when you're beautiful, you can't. It's hard to maintain your ideal of beauty, so you become critical or depressed because of the changes that you can't stop. And so and there's always endless anxiety, and in the belief in time is our reality, because the future is, right now in society, even here in Thailand, which has handled the COVID pandemic quite well, and the death account that is pretty small, and the amount of contagion is relatively under control, but still you feel this sense of doom in the future, of overpopulation, of climate change, natural disasters, more pandemics, and this is all imagined in the here and now. So you keep investigating, what is time? What is the past? What is the future? The present is like this. But you can't describe it and define it, but you know right now, being conscious is like this. And that is stable, that doesn't change. But what I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, feel, changes all the time. You can't have a permanent, beautiful thought or permanent state of good health and well-being, as a personality, through identifying with your body, because the body is a sensitive form that is subject to change, to weather changes, to climate, to what others say about you, what you believe others think of you, your sense of yourself as a person, a separate individual person. is, it tends towards criticism and seeing if you had a straighter nose, or not, your ears weren't so big, or you had beautiful hair and perfect teeth, then you'd be perfectly happy. but that's just imagining an ideal that never can exist, So all you can do is develop, obsession with what you look like, or what you believe you look like, or what you think others think you look like. And that's all about, thinking in the future, when you're, at my age, you start, death is not that far away. The reality of, even though death is ever a present possibility, when you're 86 years old, you're not going to last that much longer. And so if I would see myself as this physical body, this old 86-year-old body, the future is death. Death is a mystery. What is it? What happens when you die? So we ask ourselves, do you go to heaven, hell? Is it oblivion? Is it nothing? And you're trying to define the afterlife or after-death experiences in either pleasant terms of heaven, or absolute misery, hell, or just total oblivion, nothing. When you're dead, there's nothing left. These are all beliefs. Some are comforting, like heaven is what is desirable, hell is what nobody wants. Some people want oblivion, but what we can know is that what we want or don't want is created through thinking. It's not the way things are. So when the Buddha said the gate to the deathless is open, I often use this quote when I start giving Dhamma Talks, formal Dhamma Talks, because it inspired me in the early years of when I discovered Buddhism. The gate to the deathless is open. What is the gate to the deathless? The door to the deathless. What is the deathless? So you investigate, you find out your body's going to die. Your senses are going to pack up and stop and fade out, or you could go blind or deaf before you die. There's all possible things to worry about in the future. And will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 86? Kind of fears that old people have. Who's going to look after me when I'm old? And because you can worry about that, about old age, about being left alone, about not having a home to live in, or the security that we all depend on in terms of what we believe is secure. But the security of the gate to the deathless, then the deathless is, what is that? And it has to be through intuitive awareness that we realize deathlessness. Because the consciousness isn't born and doesn't die. Consciousness through senses, when we send consciousness out through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, then we're depending upon things that are impermanent and unsatisfactory on the senses, because they can change very quickly. And one could go blind or deaf, or lose one's taste, or be disabled physically through disease or accidents. We all know that possibility. But what is deathless? You can't imagine. But then these clues in the that the Buddha gives us about the gate, the door to the deathless. What would that's a metaphor. But what could that mean in the reality of here and now is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the gate, the door. That's where we realize the deathless. Ultimate reality, or Dhamma. Dhamma in Pali Buddhism is the deathless. It isn't born, doesn't die. And so the gate, the door, the entrance to the deathless is through awareness, mindfulness, or conscious, intuitive awareness.
You've made a lot of use of those teachings of the Buddha that sounds like koans. I mean, the metaphor is one that you can't figure out through reasoning, but then you've spoken a lot in the past about the unborn, the uncreated, the unformed, the unconditioned. You've used that for reflection to really...
Yeah, when I was a Samanera, this was before I met Luang Por Chah, I did a year's meditation as a Samanera, a novice monk in Nong Khai province. And I used the Four Noble Truths and the basic sutta teachings as a guide during that year. And the teaching that other than the Four Noble Truths themselves, the teaching that really interested me was there is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. If there was not the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned, there'd be no escape from the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned. Because there is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned, there is an escape from the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned. Now when you're meditating, investigating Dhamma, according to these sutta teachings, you begin to see, that the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. You have the insight just through investigating, asking yourself, who sees, who hears, who smells, tastes, touch? And are these conditions that you can depend on? When they're so subject to other conditions for their operation. There's sentience, it's sensory realm, it's the world around us. It's very unstable, undependable because it's forever changing. But then there is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, and then I started reflecting, what could that be? Just what is unborn? What has no beginning? And then we reflect on that all conditions are impermanent. And so, the conditions are impermanent. What is unconditioned, unborn, uncreated? And so through this kind of investigation, I'd get insights into what is always present here and now is a conscious awareness.
But when you're working with these questions, you have to be willing to sit with not knowing. Because leaving the rational mind to come into this kind of intuitive sense, like what is the unconditioned, the answer doesn't necessarily present itself immediately to us.
Right, because that's the value of it. There's no answer. There's insight, but no intellectual answer to it. You can't know the unborn, uncreated, unconditioned as something, because then it would be born, created, and conditioned. So it takes this, when we say trust your awareness, it takes this act of trust and patient endurance. To be patient with things, not trying to get enlightened or become enlightened or get rid of defilements or faults, but understanding patiently observing, witnessing the way things are, the changing conditions that we identify with. And through that kind of investigation, it's not intellectually, it's not about right and wrong, good or bad anymore. It's not about ideals or heaven or hell. It's about here and now. What sustains itself through all the changes of pleasure, pain, happiness, suffering, good and bad, heaven and hell, is awareness. You're aware when you're in hell, when you're really depressed and want to destroy yourself. You're aware of that. And you interpret it very personally. But if you stop interpreting everything on a personal level, because that's not the way things are, you're not a real person. You're not a separate individual form in a vast, mysterious universe like it seems as an individual, as a personality. You're not that. And that, we're all going to die, so eventually, this is just not nature doing its thing, doing what it's supposed to be doing. The body's supposed to get old. It's subject to changing conditions that are beyond control. So we do have sicknesses, pandemics, and that where do they come from? Can we blame them on God or on, governments, or, where did the COVID pandemic come from? We want to blame the Chinese, or because you always want to blame somebody for what's wrong. But what's wrong is part of the way things move. Right and wrong, good, bad, day and night. And then there is the unborn, unformed, uncreated, unconditioned. And then your thinking mind stops because you can't imagine any of those. You can't imagine unborn, unformed, uncreated, unconditioned. You can form, like space doesn't have any form, but space is also not the unborn, uncreated. What is unborn, where is space, is in consciousness. You're aware of space. You perceive space. You just looking in this room here, I can see space. So with my sensory eyes, where consciousness I can't see, because that's what I am. So you take yourself back to the source where you can't go any further, and it's not self. It's not Ajahn Sumedho. It's not Robert Jackman. It's not a man or a woman. Consciousness is where we're one. It's perfection. Consciousness is perfection. It's Dhamma. In Christian terms, it's God. It's it's here and now and always with us. And it's not subject to birth and death. But what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, and feel is always going to subject to other conditions that are beyond our control. If we could have our own way and make everything perfect, but nobody can do that. Because, perfection doesn't lie in conditions that depend on time and space. So, when you talk about the 6 elements, consciousness is the first element, then space, then earth, fire, water, and air. So consciousness, there can be no space if there was not consciousness. So space is in consciousness. The solid element, the liquid element, the fire element, the air element are all in consciousness. So these are forms. Forms need space to manifest, to go through their cycle of beginning and ending. You can't just have earth, fire, water, and air without space. And what manifests from consciousness is consciousness itself, formed, but it's impermanent and not self. So you have these characteristics the Buddha emphasized of anicca, dukkha, anatta, of unsatisfactory or suffering, unsatisfactory, impermanent, and not self. Then ask yourself, this is questioning in terms of personality. I can witness my personality, what I think I am and what I believe in, what I like and don't like, and what I approve of and don't approve of, and who I regard as a friend and who I don't regard as a friend, and what's right and wrong, and good government and good politics and abundant economy. And this is the New Year's event. We wish you all happiness, long life, and security, and good health. You're wishing all the best, because these things are subject to change. And we hope next year, at the very end of 2020, we hope next year will be much better than this year in terms of the pandemic going away and we become successful and our health improves. We all want the best. But in wanting the best, you also create the concept of what's worst, what could really happen, what might happen next year in 2021 or tomorrow is the unknown, isn't it? You don't know. And that kind of knowing, it's intuitive knowing. It's not intellectual knowing about what's going to happen to the planet or the sun and moon and stars in the universe in the future. It's not trying to figure that, because that part of our intellect is conditioned. It's not ultimately real. And we give names to objects and forms, and we give, in our world, create a world around us that we believe is our reality, which is all about names and forms that we've created in our minds, rather than resting in awareness, abiding in awareness, which we don't create, which we are, which is perfect in itself. So it's like, I used to, when I was living in England, I used to begin the retreats, like 10-day retreats, where I'd say, you're all here because you think there's something wrong with you. You're not, you see so many things, you worry, you have anxious, you have guilt, you have self-criticism, you have difficult relationships, you worry about the future, and so anxiety and worry haunt our minds, and we want to get rid of that, because we see ourselves always as these very imperfect conditions. So when you see yourself always as an imperfect condition, you're going to suffer, because that's not what you are, ultimately. So you take refuge in Theravada Buddhism, you say take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. What does that mean? in terms of practical reality here and now, of being here and now, is resting in awareness, trusting awareness. The Buddha Dhamma Sangha are Pali words in this particular religious tradition. But they're not beliefs. You're not believing in Dhamma, Buddha, or Sangha, but taking refuge in it. So what is you can really take refuge in now, here and now, is awareness. No matter what condition you're in, physically, emotionally, mentally. And if you trust that awareness, rather than just trying to if you're feeling unhappy or depressed, trying to get rid of these kind of moods or unwanted mental states or physical conditions, then you're always resisting, fighting. You're not trusting in awareness. You have no refuge, but in you take refuge in your desires to get rid of what you don't want, rather than recognizing what we don't want is not self. It's not personal. It's like this. So then we begin, as we reflect in this way, then we begin to relax. Well, there's nothing. We don't feel we're born in sin and there's something terribly wrong with us that we've got to fix. We give up those notions, those fantasies that we've acquired in our life, and just not annihilate them. You just don't believe them anymore. So you let go. They still can occur. You can still get angry or depressed, but the difference between one who's recognized Dhamma, who realizes ultimate reality, and one who doesn't, is that the one who doesn't is always struggling, fighting, trying to get hold of something they desire and get rid of something they don't like. And that's what samsara means in this word samsara, the endless cycles of birth and death, trying to get reborn in a happy state. Fear of being reborn in a hellish state, fear of, like depression is a common problem in modern society. Not in third world societies where they have to struggle to survive, to get enough food, but in sophisticated cultured societies with high-tech advancements in modern science. What you think, we've made life as comfortable as possible in this past 100 years, physically, and just the magic of technology and science is marvelous. Medical science and engineering and whatnot. All of this is blossomed forth in a way that we only fantasized about it 50, 60 years ago. So we have, comfortable lives, but we still endlessly feel angry or resentful or worried or anxious, or we blame ourselves, blame others, blame God, because we don't know what we are, we don't know who we are. And what we think we are, we can only see in terms of the critical mind. So the thinking mind, its whole function is to divide and separate. When you're thinking, you're not born thinking. You acquire that after you're born through language, through memory, and through conditioning, social, cultural conditioning. You're told what's right and wrong, good and bad, how you should be, how you shouldn't be. You're rewarded for being good, obeying the rules, and punished for breaking the rules. And so, we're highly conditioned as personalities. And personalities always make us feel very separate and vulnerable because we see each other as totally separate, as friends or enemies. If you If you don't smile at me, then I feel threatened. Or if you look at me with an angry look, then I'm worried, What have I done? And so we spend our lives, worrying and anxious, trying to affirm life, make life happy, trying to befriend people and smile at them and make them feel good, or criticize them and make them feel miserable. We're subject to praise and blame. Our mood of the day can completely transform if we're praised and admired, or if we're blamed and criticized. What is that changes, from waking up in the morning feeling happy and then being criticized and feeling depressed? What changes from being happy to depression so quickly? Is that a person? Is that somebody to take refuge in, being happy or depressed? Or is it what is it? You're aware when there's happiness is like this, when the depression is like this. That awareness is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. So there is the escape. It's escape hatch, mindfulness. It's the escape hatch that is available to all of us. Be liberated from the tyranny of the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned.